Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Willem Smit and I'm Professor of Marketing at ASB School of Business. It is a great pleasure and also honor to get the opportunity to share some of our interesting and relevant research that we at ASB School of Business are doing. As a school, as a business school, we are intrigued by how people get to lead and drive change and to make a positive impact on their teams, on their organizations, and at society at large. So, one of the questions we are interested in is who was willing to take business risks during the pandemic? And of course, in terms of physical health risks, the bravest of us all were the healthcare professionals and other frontliners. So praise to them for all such risks that they have been taking in stopping and are still taking, and stopping and spreading, stopping the spread and flattening the curve. On the academic front, however, many economies experience unprecedented depressions. And who were those business heroes with economic courage and resilience? That is the question that drives our research for this study. And a large part of these heroes, a large portion of these heroes, were the digital entrepreneurs. In the last 21 months, the economic lockdowns forced firms and consumers alike to shift to online channels and to use more intensively digital tools. This shift also forced dramatic changes in the in entrepreneurial activities. And with all of this, a lot of lessons, I think, can be learned from dealing with uncertainty, even if you're not an entrepreneur. So let us look closely at this segment of the population. Who are these digital entrepreneurs? According to Scott Shane, professor of economics at Chase Western Reserve in the US, in his book, Illusions of Entrepreneurship, the typical entrepreneur looks a lot like doesn't look like Bill Gates. It looks more like the guy who lives across the street from you, who sits next to you at church or goes to the mosque. Shane, however, describes a profile of a typical entrepreneur as married, with a working spouse, in his world, in the US, but interestingly, he has a very narrow stereotype of an entrepreneur. Because the entrepreneur saw this opportunity in making it big by betting everything. With such an image, so like most stereotypes, those are not. They're often very wrong. As research at MIT by Professor Pierre Auzolay and his co-authors recently showed that the typical, that so-called young 20-year-old entrepreneur in the tech is basically a lie. It's the famous profiles that are well featured in the popular press, like Steve Jobs starting early, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates. Those are exceptions. Pierre and his team debunks that myth of the young entrepreneur and actually finds that the average is 41 years, but with a wide range, with a wide variety, with a wide variance. So there's not just this one type of individuals among the digital entrepreneurs. They operate in a collective. And of changing formations. And so let's look as closely at this group. So generally, it's about digital technologies getting infused with entrepreneurship, and that has dramatically changed how firms are created. These digital entrepreneurs operating in a changing collective, first, That is made possible by the digital infrastructure, consisting of digital technology tools and systems like cloud computing, data analytics, online communities, social media, 3D printing, digital makerspaces, offering communication and collaboration for this collective to work together and to create new things, to create new firms, new innovations, and to take shape of entrepreneurship. That is also enhanced with the platforms. That offers a shared common set of services and architecture that helps entrepreneurs to come together and create new complementary services of these platforms. Of course, Apple's iOS, Harmony OS for Huawei, Android for Google are the big phone platforms. You can also think of platforms like simple Wix, offering a platform for you to create websites. And ultimately, then the third part that really makes this digital entrepreneurship as such an interesting collective are the artifacts, are basically the digital components, the applications that are, and media content that is shaped by these entrepreneurs. And critical about that new notion of digital entrepreneurship is that information gets decoupled from its related physical form. A product, it's not so much a physical product or a specific service, but it's that separation of information and physical form, creating apps and other services through digital, creates a whole new range of ways to collaborate and co-create. So these digital artifacts, platforms, and infrastructure have changed the process of entrepreneurship, and it's particularly on two parts. You could say it's more fluid. And to give an example here from Southeast Asia, Fave started out as Fave as a fintech company offering payment solutions to consumers and offline businesses to able to save money and to promote promotions. That was actually started much more through an app for fitness, with K-Fit. So in that way, it has become more fluid. It's not so much starting with a specific idea and that you bring to the end, to the market. It is much more fluid and it can change over time. Secondly, what is really different with digital entrepreneurship is that it is more distributed. The infusion of digital technologies have changed that locus of control for the entrepreneur. It's not so much the predefined founder of a set of founders that drives the entrepreneur from the beginning till the market, but it is much more enhanced by digital platforms where new parties come together to create the venture. For instance, crowdfunding systems like Quickstarter or here in Malaysia, Pitchin are great examples for that more distributive way of creating new firms. Digital makerspaces like Mereka is also a form that basically makes entrepreneurship much more than the sole hero, but much more as a team in working around an entrepreneurial initiative. So with the infusion of those new technologies, that really has transformed the way businesses are created, there's also a new way of dealing with uncertainty. And that is what I'd like to talk about today. These are the three main questions I'd like to present and talk with you about. How to digitalize your business model for better performance, and actually asking yourself about how the new technologies can actually help me in working with new uncertainties. Yet, there's also the question, what is actually uncertainty? Is that different from risk? And thirdly, how do we actually follow effective strategies dealing with uncertainty? First, to answer our first question, we decided to do a study among ASEAN-based startups. And together with 5 schools from the region, we collected about 686 data points, startups. We interviewed them, of which 139 in Malaysia. All of these firms were rather young, 8 years or younger. We asked them how they have digitalized their startup. And one dimension is to look at what are the technologies they have incorporated and relied on. And so here you see the descriptive statistics on which were the most popular digital technologies that were incorporated in the business model. One hand is you can clearly see there are technologies that are essential, that are basic. The others are more advanced and require more specialized knowledge. The other way we measured digitalization of startups is we looked specifically at where in their business model have they applied digital technologies. And then we asked questions on the different elements of that so-called business model canvas that basically dissects a business. What is the value proposition? How does it relate to customers? What are the key activities to make the value proposition happening? And what are the key partners that are involved in making it a success? Then we see that overall, throughout our sample, that the emphasis of digitalization throughout all the startups is much more on the front-end side, and it's less on dealing with key partners. That is, I think, interesting for firms to think about on how they could actually start digitalizing further. What are new areas? Another one is that what actually drives that success? What drives that success of digitalizing your startup and getting a better performance? And we found that missing link is actually making use of that digitalization to experiment and to try and launch new things. Since our data collection was just last summer, the questions were very much related to how the startup has responded to the COVID pandemic. And so under that situation of incredible stress, the firms have changed a lot. But those firms that actually managed to digitalize more, they have experimented more, and they managed to come out of this COVID much better than their counterparts that did not digitalize as much as they did and did not experiment as much as they did. So there are 4 findings out of this research. First, the distinction between elementary and more advanced technologies. Then it's much more about there's much more about the application in the business model rather than the types of technologies. And then fourthly, the positive impact is mainly carried by that experimenting with the business model. So, moving on to the second question, what actually is the difference between uncertainty and risk? And since PNB is an investment company, you're working daily with this distinction, and it's quite interesting to ask yourself how would you successfully deal with uncertainty rather than risk? I could see a question coming, well, since there's more and more data available, capturing more data and processing that by machine learning and artificial intelligence, wouldn't that end up all uncertainty becoming predictable? Well, that is not so likely, I would say. And why is that? Because there are still different types of uncertainty and risks. The most important part is to make the distinction between these types. And this is what Frank Knight, professor of economics at the University of Chicago, already made clear in 1921. Just a year after the Spanish flu pandemic, he made a distinction between risk, uncertainty, and true uncertainty. And you can think of the features of each of these as a hypothetical game where a player wins by drawing a red ball from an urn. And in the risk version of the game, so on the on the left-hand side, it's clear, it's transparent that what the distribution of the red versus the white balls is. So the chance to catch a red ball is quite high. In the uncertainty version, the middle one, you don't know what is the distribution, but it is knowable by taking samples. And here the sample is half, so the assessment would be the chances are that it's 50%. Then the last one is the uncertainty, the true uncertainty box. And that is where things come out that are instances that are unclassifiable and it's unknowable ex ante. So you have this distinction between risk, uncertainty, and true uncertainty. And so let's apply this to what we saw last year, or when the pandemic hit us and we were faced with economic lockdowns. We will also ask our question, is this going to be a normal recession like this, jumping up, or is it going to be an L-shaped one with a troublesome recovery, or does it lie in between? So that uncertainty, if you would say, well, if you take a risk approach, you would look back at the 11 recessions that were hit the US in after the Second World War, and you would kind of make an estimate for an average of what would be the recovery time. If you're focusing on making small samples and regarding this event as an uncertainty event, you would basically look at what purchasing managers would say, what is the expectations of the economy. But if you would look at it from an uncertainty point of view, you would not bother to predict. And you would spend energy to try to shape the environment to your advantage. And that brings us to that third part, how to effectively strategize in dealing with true uncertainty. And many of us, me included, academics definitely, we want to improve our predictions when uncertainty increases. But however, that is a very unproductive response. Better ways to respond to true uncertainty and to strategies that can be learned from are strategies that can be learned from expert entrepreneurs. The strategies that they follow when they think of a new opportunity that they don't have any data for. So they don't have any data to make predictions for. So I would like, for that, I'd like to refer to work of Sarah Saraswati, who is the professor of entrepreneurship at Darden Business School at the University of Virginia. She was very much interested in how to teach entrepreneurship, and and she wanted to know what kind of logic, what kind of way of thinking expert entrepreneurs apply when they create their ventures. And instead of asking them about their success stories of the past, she gave them puzzles. She gave them puzzles to solve. And then through hearing to the reasoning how they solve these puzzles, she found out that expert entrepreneurs actually use a logic that is very different from the way we at business schools actually teach corporate strategy. And so I'm also guilty of this. I also teach strategy in a very predictive way. in the sense of that on one hand, you start with what are your goals? What you want to capture? You want to size the market. You would like to set a target for a market share, and then you think about the means that would match that goal. You would think your approach to the risk is in a way that you look at your different options and you would kind of calculate the net present value based on expected and actually focusing very much on expected returns. After you have invested in it, then the cash flows come in. So that is how you deal with risk. A third kind of classical way in corporate strategy is promoting the attitude of all competitors are potential, of all firms, other firms are potential competitors. Kind of the paranoia idea. And fourthly, what we generally use is that any unexpected changes, contingencies, need to be avoided. So we define we do strategy planning with scenarios, worst case, likely case, best case scenario. And so we like to avoid contingencies. Sada Saraswati, when she spoke with these expert entrepreneurs, she found actually that there are very different approach to strategize their ventures. And it's actually a new venture where everything is still uncertain. There's no data to base predictions on. So she actually found that the starting point for an expert entrepreneur is based on the means, on the resources that she or he has available, what she knows, who she is, and whom she knows. And a good example, I think, in Malaysia is Aerodyne, that also the CEO and founder started actually with a media company and basically brought in his knowledge and resources that he had gained from that venture. And started actually exploring that opportunity of drone services, thinking of first starting with his means. Another approach that is very different from corporate managers is managing risks by managing it through affordable loss. So you wouldn't focus on the upside risk, but very much on what you think you can afford to lose. A great example here in Malaysia is Allegra. And Allegra is personalized styling that also had started modestly with a group of stylists and modestly with collections, and actually gathering more data about the persons they can customize the styling for. Third is very different, is the attitude to other firms. And that is really in the tradition of digital entrepreneurs. They see others as potential collaborators. Another drone services industry example is VStream, that actually says, well, I can be another service for drone services, but I can also become a partner for organizations that want to offer tendering. I have a lot of knowledge about this industry, so I can actually help to grow this business on the client side and maybe offer insurance services. Fourthly, and it's a very different dimension of strategizing in an uncertain environment, is actually embracing surprises. So actually, when the lockdown happens, you have to move online, and that is what Next Academy did, a coding school here in KL that had always classes in person, and basically embraced this new challenge by enlarging their online offering on courses. So all of this, you would say, well, now I know there's a different logic. When I get exposed to uncertainty, will it be easy for me to adopt entrepreneurial logic? Well, according to research that I conducted through an experiment of corporate managers, that is not that easy. we experimented with 147 managers. We put them in different groups. One an experimental group that was faced with uncertainty, and the baseline is with a group of managers that were faced with a predictable environment. And every time they had to take decisions in 9 periods, they were faced with 20 choices, strategy choices. 10 were prediction-based, others were control-based. And then we see, quite intriguingly, that managers faced with uncertainty, they routinely choose prediction. And worse, even when the uncertainty increases, they tend to try to predict harder. And that's what we see here on that right line. That right line, the number of prediction actions goes up and up as the game, in this way, the game progresses. So it is not that easy. And so, of course, being familiar with the type of strategies to choose from helps you, but know that it takes effort to stay away from trying to predict. So, to recap, and then we go to Q&A if there's still time. I'd like to recap saying that we learned on how new businesses digitalize, and that is basically the performance is basically driven through experimentation. We learned about that it's important to distinguish true uncertainty from risk, and not to treat risk or normal uncertainty the same way let me rephrase. Not to treat true uncertainty the same way as we do with risk and normal uncertainty, but actually follow effective strategies of control in dealing with that uncertainty. And with that, I would like to thank you for today's masterclass. I understand there are a couple of questions. We have Q&A. Oh yes, I see the first question. How to be resilient in the midst of uncertainty? All right. So thank you, Noraini. That's a great question. And I think a good way is to think about what are your means? What are the means available that you have? Who you are as a person, what you know, and who do you know? So what you know what you are as a person, you would say, what are my hobbies? What do I like to do? What is my interests? Who do I know who has knowledge in helping me or has resources to help me in a more challenging situation? Think about those, one of 4 principles. One of them is means. I would start with means. Second question. How to fully utilize technology to compete in e-commerce challenges for a small SME. So, if we combined both studies, the ASEAN startup study with the experiment among corporate managers, we know that digital technologies are a resource, are a mean, and basically they are, through that ecosystem of digital entrepreneurship, very accessible. So it's a very fluid way of acquiring those. So that would be, for any SME, an approach to take on the challenge for e-commerce. Yeah? Third question. What are some of the challenges to expect for a first-timer with digital entrepreneurship? I would for any venturing out in any new field, I would apply those, and it sounds like this is a recipe for everything, but when entrepreneurship is new to you, everything is uncertain, you need to collect data and find collaborators to co-create your journey into digital entrepreneurship. So think about using those 4 principles, because if you can't predict the environment, the next stages of the future, you need to create it. Thank you so much, everyone.